Meeting number 85 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, and pursuant to Standing Order 108 Bracket 2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, April 20th, 2023, the committee is meeting to discuss the subject matter of Bill C-47, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 28th, 2023. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. So, members and witnesses, today's meeting is that we will be focused on parts 1 to 3 of the bill. We have with us from the Ministry of Finance a number of officials. I believe it's 9 is what I've been told. And so I will list those officials that are with us, and maybe one of those officials or a number of them could just give us a little kind of brief overview as to parts 1 to 3 and the questions that you'll be answering today from the members. So we have Gervais Coulombe, who is the Senior Director, Excise Taxation Legislation, Sales Tax Division, Tax Policy Branch. Welcome. Andrew Donnell, Senior Director, Deferred Income Plans. We have Lindsay Guire, who also is a former colleague of MP Chambers at law school, and she's the Director General of Legislation, Tax Legislation Division, Tax Policy Branch. So no preferred treatment, please, here of MP Chambers. And we have Pierre LeBlanc, Director General, Personal Income Tax Division, Tax Policy Branch. We have Warren Light, who's the Expert Advisor, Sales Tax Division, Tax Policy Branch. Mark Maxson, who's with us, is the Director of Employment and Education, Personal Income Tax Division, Tax Policy Branch. Pierre Mercil, who's the Director General, Sales Tax Legislation, Sales Tax Division, Tax Policy Branch. Amanda Riddle, who's Director of Real Property and Financial Institutions, Sales Tax Division, Tax Policy Branch. And last, but we have Kevin Schum, who's the Senior Director of International Taxation and Special Projects. Well, we want to thank you all for being with us here today. If somebody would like to just make a few remarks in regards to, sections 1, 2, 3, we would appreciate that.
Alors, bonjour, mon nom est Pierre Mercil.
Hello, my name is Pierre Mercil. We were asked not to make a formal presentation, but I'm just going to say that Part 1 concerns measures on income tax, the other one has to do with GST, and Part 3 has to do with 2 measures on excise tax. I'll be that brief. Thank you.
Okay, and welcome everybody. So we are going to get right into to members' questions then. And in this first round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask you questions. We are starting with the Conservatives. I have MP Morantz for those 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. There's a lot of you, so hopefully we'll get a lot of great information. I think I'll like to start off just by asking about the changes around electronic filing and certification of tax information and electronic payments. Just for the information of Canadians who are filing their taxes, I'm wondering if you could describe, for example, why the government is making changes to how Canadians interact with the Canada Revenue Agency.
Sure, so I'll respond to that question. So there's a number of changes in the bill. They relate to the Income Tax Act as well as to other tax statutes. There's different purposes for different changes. A number of them are to facilitate the ability for Canadians to file their taxes and to communicate with the CRA electronically. So, for example, there's changes to requirements for hand signatures. So there's elimination of certain hand signatures that were previously required. So that's to facilitate the ability for people to file more easily. There's also other changes that are intended to make the process more efficient from the perspective of the government and from the CRA's perspective. So, for example, tax advisors who are filing more than 5 returns for certain types of returns are required to do it electronically. As well, large payments above $10,000 are required to be made electronically. So that's really intended to increase the efficiency of the tax system.
If somebody didn't want to file their tax return electronically, are they still allowed to file it the old-fashioned way?
Yeah, so there's nothing that would prevent someone from filing their tax return on paper, an individual.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. I interrupted you. You can finish your...
Sorry, there's nothing that would prevent an individual from filing their tax return on paper, and if they do that, then the following year they'll be sent the information required to continue to be filing on paper, and they'll get their notice of assessment by paper.
And this piece about having to pay electronically over $10,000, what if somebody doesn't want to do that or doesn't know how to do that? Why can't they pay by check?
I think there's different options in terms of how that payment could be done.
Or it has to be electronically over $10,000?
Yeah, sorry,
does it have to be or not?
It does have to be made electronically. In terms of whether they can do it through their bank or online. I think the CRA would provide guidance to people, and I can't speak to their practices, but I assume if there was some reason why it wasn't possible for a payment to be made, that they would potentially, work with someone to find a solution.
Right now, and of course, PSAC is on strike. Do you have any information as to what services may be impeded at CRA due to the strike?
I don't have that information.
Anyone want to take a stab at that? Anyone know anything about what's going on at CRA here?
I don't think we would add anything beyond to what, CRA has put up on a website. Both the services that will continue to be provided and those that might be impacted in some way. So I think we can only point to that.
Okay, for the benefit of those who are watching, could you tell us what they put up?
It would be for the CRA to do that. So it's I don't have a comprehensive recollection of everything that's on that website.
Okay. Perhaps we could go then to the, maybe you could just comment on the doubling of the deduction for tradespeople's tools, which is, something that I think is a good development. Could you comment on how that affects tradespeople? The chair has to recognize you. Yeah.
Thank you. So this is an existing deduction that allows tradespeople to deduct up to $500 of their tools that are required to do their jobs over the amount of the Canada Employment Credit. And the proposal in Budget 2023 is to double that amount from $500 to $1,000. So these are employed tradespeople who are required to purchase tools in order to do their job.
I think this is a good idea, but just out of curiosity and for the purposes of transparency, what is the tax cost of that change?
So that's estimated at $2 million annually.
Okay. All right. Could you explain the rules regarding the extension of the residential property flipping rule to assignment sales?
Great. Thank you for the question. So you recall in the FEST legislation, which I believe was Bill C-32, Parliament passed basically a rule around dispositions of property that were made, residential property that were made held for under 1 year. And basically, those would generally be taxed as business income, but there would be certain exceptions for certain life events. Death, divorce, a job in a different place, things like that. Taking effect for the 23 tax year. So what this does is it extends that measure to assignment sales. So basically when what you've purchased is not the property, but the right to the property. So often that's, for condo constructions. I mean, that's often where that happens. So it's basically the extension of an existing rule to this other type of transaction. Also to take effect for property sold in 2023 or after.
That's 6 minutes, and now we are going to the Liberals, and I have MP Baker for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses who are here, all the public servants who are here with us today in this committee, and thank you for all of your work, not just on this, on the Budget Implementation Act, but also in general for your service to Canadians. I'd like to start by asking a question around the grocery rebate. So I'd like to ask, what is the benefit of delivering the grocery rebate through a system like the GST credit instead of creating a new program?
Great, thanks for the question. Basically, it allows, when you use an existing platform, you can deliver it more quickly, and you can also deliver it at a cheaper administrative cost. So those are the main two advantages.
Yeah, and so could you just talk about why, just for the folks at home who may not, sort of follow the pros and cons of the different approaches, like doing it through GST versus a new program, could you just talk about why it's more efficient cost-wise and why it's quicker?
It's mainly quicker. Basically, so it's the Canada Revenue Agency that would be delivering the proposed grocery rebate, and it'd be doing so through the GST credit system. So that's a system where the benefit that the CRA is delivering 4 times a year. To a large swath of the population. So currently, you have about 11 million individuals and families who are receiving the GST credit. So essentially, it's building. In terms of changes to their information technology systems, it's certainly easier to work with something to build on something that's already functional, and to make the necessary changes rather than to start from scratch. I guess that's. That also answers the second part of your question, I think, sir, in terms of the efficiency and the limiting administrative costs as well. So,
well, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Just staying on the topic of the grocery rebate. So, one of the things I'm really pleased about is that the House agreed to expedite the implementation, like the delivery of the grocery rebate, which will support over 10 million Canadians who are struggling to put food on the table. And the average support is $467 for families and $225 for seniors, which, I raise that because for the benefit, I know you all know that, but for the folks at home, I think it's important to know that. I really think this is an important measure for those who are vulnerable, and especially for the seniors in my community in Etobicoke Centre. Am I correct in my understanding? Is what I've just said correct? Am I correct in my understanding of how this rebate will affect Canadians? That's the first part of my question. And the second part of my question is when can we expect Canadians to receive this support? Because that's a question that I get from my constituents all the time. When will it come?
Thanks for those questions. So for the first part, maybe what I would add is just that it would be a benefit of up to $467 for a family with 2 children. So that's the maximum amount. Also, for a single individual without children, the maximum benefit would be $234. Sometimes you'll see, so when the government talks about $225 for seniors, that's an average. Recognizing that some individuals who are currently on the phase-out zone for the GST credit will receive a partial amount, so less than the maximum. So, but no, I think you've captured it well with those in terms of timing, I think I can just point to what's in the budget that, the government will endeavor to have the CRA pay this out as soon as possible following royal assent, following if it's passed by Parliament.
Okay, thank you for that. So getting royal assent and getting this passed is critical to making sure that people receive this relief. Moving on, I have about a minute and a half left, I think. So the BIA moves forward with the development of the Canadian Dental Care Plan. And this is another element of the budget that I know my constituents in Etobicoke Centre many of them are really excited about. The question I have is will this benefit be taxable, and would it impact other income tested benefits like the GST credit, for example?
And it won't be taken into account in income for the calculation of income tested benefits like the GST credit.
Sorry, can you repeat that? It may be because I'm virtual. I just didn't.
Sorry, it won't be included in income, and that means two things. First, it won't be taxable, and second, it won't be taken into account when calculating entitlement to benefits like the Canada Child Benefit, like the GST credit, and so on.
Okay. So it won't impact people's taxes. In other words, when people receive the Canadian Dental Care, when they receive Canadian Dental Care Plan, the benefit, basically this won't impact their taxes in any way.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask further questions under Part 4 because that's where, in terms of legislation, what we have is an information sharing provision in this part of the Act, this part of the bill, I'm sorry. But also it'll be, services will be paid for. So it's not like the interim benefit where people are receiving a check or a payment. It's more that the government will be paying for either all or a portion of services. So.
No further taxes paid on it. Thank you.
And thank you, MP Baker. And now going to MP Sainte-Marie, please, for 6 minutes.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning, Chair. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for all the members of the ministry being present here today. I have several questions today, but unfortunately, when I was preparing those questions, I didn't distinguish between the parts. So, if ever my question is under Part 4, I apologize in advance. I'll start with the question on Part 4 so that maybe you can transfer to your colleagues who might come to answer them later on. That has to do with monarchy. Part 31, in which Charles III is like the almighty power of Canada. So when your colleagues will come, could they verify the equivalent law that was under Queen Elizabeth II, if that was presented before Parliament in a bill in the implementation of this bill? So if your colleagues maybe could have an answer to that question, that would be very much appreciated. It's under Part 4. Now, my first question is partly in Part 1 and partly in Part 4. Last Wednesday, we adopted Bill C-46. So we would double the check for GST for groceries, even though that is not taxable, and also transfers for health services to the tune of $2 billion. That was adopted at every level on Wednesday. C-47 was presented to us in the House on Thursday with these amounts again. So if C-47 is adopted without being amended by breaking down those parts, we will find ourselves in a situation where the GST check will be doubled and another additional $2 billion to provinces. Is that the situation? Thank you.
So I'll take this question. So speaking to Part 1, so the grocery rebate amendments, so it's correct that the same amendments are in this bill as were passed as are in C-46. So if both bills were to pass, it wouldn't double the amount of the credit. The amendments do the same thing, so they would be effectively redundant. I can't speak to Part 4, but typically there are coordinating amendments in legislation that address a scenario where you have legislation in two different bills that would impact the provisions in the other bills. So you have coordinating amendments that address that scenario where one passes and then where they both subsequently or they both end up passing. So there may be coordinating amendments that address Part 4, but that would be a question to put to someone next week.
OK, je vous remercie beaucoup, Madame Guo.
Thank you, Ms. Guerra, for that very clear answer. In the budget, we had $80 billion for transition into the green energy. So my question actually will have to do with the creation of the two institutions that will be in charge of managing this money. Are they under Parts 1 to 3 or under Part 4?
Pas tous en même temps, je vous en prie.
Je pense que c'est dans la partie 4.
I think it would be under Part 4. Okay, so it is not in Part 1, 2, or 3. Thank you. Concerning employment insurance, is it under Part 4 as well? It's not under Part 1, 2, or 3. Very well. Changing the Canadian law on protecting the environment with relating to carbon tax. Is it under Part 4? Yes, it's not under Part 1, 2, or 3. Okay, I think I'll be more lucky here, Mr. Mercil, concerning regional flights. During the briefing that you gave us recently, I asked you a question about regional flights. As you know, they are expensive. Fuel prices have increased, and they continue to increase. And what we're seeing in C-47 is that there is a plan to considerably increase the tax for airline security, whether it's an international flight or a regional flight. If it goes through an airport where these security measures are in place, that tax will be imposed on regional flights. So are there any exemptions planned for that? Can you confirm if I understood the answers that you had given back then?
Oui, merci pour la question.
Thank you for your question. Thank you, Chair, for the floor. Yes, Part 3, Section 2 talks about an increase of 32.85% of tax with respect to the safety of air travelers. That is required when that flight has a relationship with any airport in Canada. So the Canadian Air Transport Security Agency will be in charge of ensuring the security measures. So this change will be a difference will move from $14.95 to about $19.95. So that's about $5 difference. If a regional flight within Canada includes either at the start or at the finish of the flight one of the airports listed in the law or in the Act, then this increase will be applied during that trip. Well, I have to reiterate the fact that that increase is to the tune of $5, and that's about 1.6% on a flight ticket. Thank you, Mr. Coulombe. That is very clear. I see that my time is up. Thank you.
To MP Blakey for 6 minutes, please.
So I'll just start off. I wanted to follow up on some of Mr. Baker's questions about the grocery rebate, and I was just, for clarity, the mechanism of the grocery rebate is effectively the same mechanism we deployed for a doubling of the GST rebate. Is that fair to say, or any of the kind of operational details or legislative details substantially different from the doubling of the GST rebate?
No, you're right.
Okay. And is it typical for tax experts in the department to offer branding advice for initiatives, or did the grocery rebate idea originate in the minister's office and get passed down to the department?
I can't comment on, what the policy-making process and where decisions on those things are taken. So,
I suppose it will remain a mystery in that case. But I think astute observers will probably have a sense of the answer. I wanted to ask, on a more technical light, one of the purposes of the BIA is to expand the definition of dividend rental arrangement to include specified hedging transactions carried out in whole or in part by registered securities dealers. And I wonder if some of our departmental officials might just be able to put in plain terms what exactly that means and why it's important from the government's perspective to do that.
Sure, so I can speak to that question. So it's a measure that was announced in last year's budget. It addresses certain hedging transactions that are engaged in by financial institutions. Effectively what they do is, so under general principles, there's a deduction where a Canadian company receives a dividend from another Canadian company in general. So what they do is they have certain types of planning that take advantage of that deduction and effectively allow them to double the deduction. So what they do is they have a member in a group will hold shares long, so they'll own shares of a Canadian company, and then a registered securities dealer within the group will borrow and short sell those shares. And as a result of that short selling arrangement, they typically would have an obligation to make a payment equal to the amount of the dividend. And they would receive a deduction equal to 2/3 of the amount of that payment under existing rules in the Income Tax Act. So in those situations, they're effectively able to get one deduction for the dividend received and another deduction for the payment that was made equal to 2/3 of the amount of the dividend. So they get a 1 2/3 deduction on the dividend, even though economically they have no exposure to the shares because they have a long position and a short position. So the purpose of the measure is to address that planning and amend the rules. So in that situation, they're only able to get one deduction, which is equal to their the amount that they have paid out with respect to that dividend.
Right on. Thank you very much. I thought that was important to make part of the record. And I was curious in respect to the Canada Workers Benefit, it talks about quarterly advance payments. Sometimes in the discussion early on around changes to the Canada Workers Benefit, around the fall economic statement, I think some folks were talking about a biannual payment, so getting paid just 2 times in the year instead of 4. Was that just a misimpression of what the intent was in the fall, and this has been the case all along, or has some of the thinking changed around the frequency with which the CWB payments would be made?
I don't recall seeing references to a biannual payment, but it is quarterly payments. It's 3 quarterly payments, which leads to maybe a bit of confusion, but there's one in July, one in October, one in January, and then effectively the residual would kind of be the 4th quarterly payment with the tax return. But yeah, I didn't see references to biannual payments. It was always quarterly.
Okay, and then in the case where a person's income has increased substantially over the course of the year, government has said that they wouldn't be entitled to their final payment, but nothing would be clawed back. So is it just that 4th residual at tax time that if they otherwise would have been entitled to an extra payment, they don't get that extra payment?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to, one of the things that the BIA does is that it increases the ability of defined benefit pension plans to borrow against their assets. And so I'm just wondering if someone from the department could explain for the committee what safeguards are in place currently, and if any are being added to the mix with the BIA to ensure that people's pension plans aren't going to get over-leveraged by the increased borrowing activity.
The safeguards on borrowing or investment risks are not part of the Tax Act per se. They're part of provincial pension standards legislation and the Federal Pension Benefit Standards Act. So when doing our internal analysis, we responded to stakeholders that wanted a bit more flexibility in borrowing in their defined benefit plans and gave a small limited amount to do the borrowing, and we'll have to rely on the safeguards and the other standards legislation.
Could you give us a little bit of a description of what some of the commonalities are across those protections, just to give the committee a sense of...
Many of the provincial acts point to the federal statute, which says in a certain schedule that there are investment concentration limits. You can't own not more than 10% of your investments could be in any one entity. You cannot take a 30% or greater stake in certain entities. So those types of investment concentration limits.
Is there anything in particular about this borrowing? So like if a pension plan were going to borrow the equivalent of 20% of its assets, could they then put all of that borrowed money into one investment or one enterprise? Or how does that, is there any restriction on how they can use the borrowed funds? Or does that just then, or is it just treated like their assets increase by 20% and as long as they invest according to the existing rules, there's no further concern from regulators or the governing legislation?
The tax rule itself does not prescribe, so presumably you could put 20% of your borrow 20% and put it in one entity, but I think those other safeguards in the provincial standards rules would probably prevent a large mass multi-billion-dollar investments in any one entity.
Thank you, Mr. Donnell. MP Blakey and members, that's the end of our first round. Moving into the second round, we have MP Chambers up for 5 minutes, please. You got your timer going. I see that. I see that. I know you're.
I'd like to be fair to my colleagues. Congratulations on another budget. It's a lot of work. I know it takes lots of work. Show of hands, so it's not on the record, who would like a fixed budget date? Yeah, I see smiles. I'll take. Okay, we got a couple. Just no names. It's fine. I know it would help our committee, and I certainly know it would probably help those of you who work very hard on these things over holidays and all the rest of it. So some greater discipline around budget dates would be welcome, I think, by many. I'll leave it there. I just wanted to circle back on a couple items. I think it was Mr. LeBlanc. You did mention about something needing royal assent in order to perform, but my understanding is there's actually some precedent for, as long as a Ways and Means motion is tabled in the House, that CRA would administer tax changes based on that public tabling. Is that fair?
Thanks for the question. For most tax proposals, it is.
Okay.
So, but here we're talking with something like the grocery rebate, something paid of the GST credit system. You're talking about refundable credits. So you're talking about amounts paid out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. And the CRA's position is for those sorts of changes that it'll only do so when Parliament has passed the legislation and there's royal assent.
Okay, and and there was all-party support to do that. So there's a bill that I assume is going to make its way quickly to the Governor General's hand for signature. Forgive if this is not in the right section, but dental care's brought up, at least the tax sharing or the tax information sharing on behalf of the taxpayer. If the benefit is not taxed, what's the purpose for having taxpayers disclose the benefit that they receive from an employer of dental benefits? Is there a...
So that particular piece is in Part 4. You might be able to get a better answer from them, but my understanding is it's for the purpose of ensuring eligibility of the individual.
Okay. It wouldn't be because there's folks who think that we should tax the dental benefits of Canadians in private plans, right?
It has no connection to that. It's for the purpose of Health Canada to see who has coverage. But again, it's a Part 4 measure.
I remember lots of discussion in budget previously to budget 2016 or 17 on that issue. So lots of folks have been recommending that for some time. Are the provisions for the CRA, the electronic filing, do any of these have to support the automatic tax filing objectives of the government, or is this solely on the basis of like electronic filing? I'm just trying to understand the, will pre-fill people's tax returns. Are any of the sections in this BIA to support that objective, or are these different?
Yeah, none of the measures would support that objective, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, that's fair. Final question. It's very technical, so it's okay if we could take this offline if we'd prefer, but it relates to some of the excise tax changes with respect to digital assets, and some clarification that non-resident mining pools who use a certain kind of technology or setup, that they would be not considered sharing their payments. I know there's an industry in Canada that has kind of set itself up and wanting to make sure it can avail itself of the input tax credits. Can we get clarification on that? Could I follow up with maybe a technical question if that's not something we can clarify here today?
Yeah, happy. So I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but
yeah. So really, it's those who use FPPS or PPS, which is, I think you know what I'm talking about, whether they would be considered to be sharing their mining payment with a Canadian entity.
I think that's probably an offline conversation.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
I guess if you can get some of that information the MP Chamber is looking for. And now, members, we have the Liberals for 5 minutes. MP Zarowitz, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to say good morning to all my colleagues, and thanks to all of you for all your hard work. There's definitely a lot of technical details, so really appreciate you being here this morning to answer our questions. I have two big parts of me. One is a business side. I've been in business for 20 years, and then there's also a side of me that is a very big constituency person. And one of the things that's worrying me this time is there are many people in my riding that are caught in a cycle of poverty, and I worry about them a lot. The first question I want to ask you about is about the automatic tax filing. My understanding is that we right now already provide that service to a number of Canadians, and I wouldn't mind if you could tell me how many Canadians actually already benefit from automatic tax filing. And then I understand, and then the second part is 2020, budget 2023, I believe, is now going to increase that to allow, I believe, 2.5 million Canadians to be able to get access to automatic tax filing by 2025. So if someone can answer those two questions, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks for the question. What I think I can do is provide some high-level information. I mean, it was an announcement in Budget 23. There's no measure in the bill related to that. I mean, in terms of, I think the CRA currently provides a number of services, basically to facilitate tax filing, to support tax filing for Canadians. So, I mean, one example is Autofill My Return. I mean, where you can use, through other tax software, you can download basically all the information that CRA has on your return. And I think that was used about 14 million times in the last tax season. So that would be an example. Other examples include...
So Mr. LeBlanc, sorry, I'm just going to stop, just because I actually have very specific questions on the automatic tax return. So if it's not right now in sections 1 to 3, I'm okay not to proceed, and just I have other questions that I can ask.
1, 2, 3, or 4.
That's fine.
So.
That's fine. Sorry about that. That's my bad. Then I'd like to turn over to the Canada Worker Benefit, because that also helps people who are on the lower end of the income scale. If you could just maybe just for those that are listening, just explain who the Canada Worker Benefit is available to, and then what is the... and I believe that what we are doing in Budget 2023 is we are offering to advance payments of the Canada Worker Benefit. And so if you could just tell us what the impact of that will be on Canadians who are eligible for the benefit. So just reminding us what the Canada Worker Benefit, what does it do, who is able to access it, and then what the impact will be on the advance payments.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So from a broad lens, it's available to most workers below a certain income threshold. So if you are a single individual, unmarried, no children, in most provinces, that you could be making up to $33,000 or have income of up to $33,000, I should say. And if you're a couple, it's up to at least $43,000. Or if you're a single parent, for example, so if you're a multi-person household, that limit could be higher if you're a dual earner couple. And there is some variation in Quebec, Nunavut, and Alberta who've entered agreements to sort of adjust the parameters. But that's kind of the general story is you're making at least $3,000 from work and you're earning less than about $33,000 for a single individual, $43,000 for a family. In terms of the advance payment proposal that was in the 22 fall economic statement, it would essentially say if you received the Canada Workers Benefit in a particular year, let's say 2022, based on your work and your income in 2022, we're going to automatically provide half of that amount of your entitlement as an advance payment during the subsequent year. So that would be starting in July and then October and then January. And if you're eligible for more when your tax return for the next year is assessed, you would get the remainder at that point.
To do that is to provide the advanced dollars to those who might be needing the dollars the most during these time of high cost of living. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
so the purpose is to kind of push it forward in time and get it to people sooner.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's mine.
Now over to MP Sainte-Marie, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur Fonseca.
Thank you, Mr. Fonseca. Question from Mr. Mercil. I had asked this question during the briefing. I just want to have confirmation. There are companies here in Quebec and in Canada in general who have huge servers who are on high-speed internet and who rent their services for the sharing of data. They contacted us because many of their clients are abroad and many of them are in crypto mining business. Now, it seems as if the GST doesn't consider them as businesses whereby their GST will be deducted from inputs, which means that they bear the burden of the tax even when the service is exported. So I want to know if there's no amendment to this 47. That is the case?
Hi there. So I think it would help if we just step back a little bit because a lot of people, it's a topic that's relatively complex, as Mr. Chambers was mentioning. So the GST is a very effective revenue source, and it, as the economy is evolving, we need to protect the tax base. And so the way the ETA, the Excise Tax Act, is structured at the moment is it's based on there being a supplier, a recipient, and there being consideration. Unfortunately, with crypto, it's a bit of an unusual situation where you've got miners who are providing a service that would otherwise normally be subject to GST, HST, but is being provided to a decentralized network of users. As a result, there's no recipient to which they can charge tax. They don't know what rate to charge, for example, if it's an export or not. And there's no consideration because you're winning rewards. So clarity was needed. So in looking at this issue over some years, we discovered that miners fall into 3 buckets, if you will. So the first type of miner is a solo miner. And a solo miner is what you might imagine, somebody in their basement doing crypto mining on their individual computer. And hopefully, if they're lucky enough, they win a reward, they get some Bitcoin. There's very little or none of that left, we understand, in the industry because the computations have become a bit too complex. The second type of miner is it's like solo miners working collectively in a mining pool, and they're sharing rewards. So that if one of them gets a reward, they can share it. And in that particular case, they're kind of like a solo miner, but it's like they're all acting collectively as one large solo miner. And the rules apply to those types of miners. So there's no identifiable recipient. Again, we're talking about a decentralized network of users. So what these amendments would do is they would take it out of the GST because it doesn't fit within the framework of the GST. So effectively, the miners would provide the service. They would be relieved of the requirement to charge GST, HST, since, again, they don't know who the recipient is or what rate would be charged. And because they're not charging GST, they would also not be entitled to input tax credits. There are other examples of that kind of thing that happens in the GST Act as well. But there's an important exception, and that exception applies when there's an identifiable recipient, an identifiable arm's length recipient who's not part of that pool. And so you're not sharing in rewards, you're providing computer services to an identifiable recipient. And if that recipient is offshore, then you would be subject to the normal GST HST rules. So you would charge GST, and if you know that the arm's length identifiable recipient, that's not the pool operator, is offshore, then you would charge 0% and you would be able to claim ITCs. So the regular rules would apply. And, this would, from our understanding, apply to a lot of the people involved in the crypto mining industry in Canada. I hope that answers your question.
Oui, wow, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
And then MP Samari, and now over to MP Blakey for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm curious, the Act talks about implementing the model reporting rules for digital platforms developed by the OECD. I'm just wondering if someone can speak to what exactly those are and why it's important that that be done.
Yes, thank you for the question. The model rules for reporting on digital platforms was developed by the OECD to address concerns about underreporting in the sharing and gig economy, because many of the participants in the sharing and gig economy who would be providing services through these online platforms, they might be unaware of the tax consequences of the income that they're receiving, or if they are aware, in some cases they might not have been voluntarily reporting their income. So the rules were developed to provide a mechanism for essentially third-party reporting, similar to the third-party reporting that many of us are familiar with respect to sources of income like employment income and investment income, where an intermediary like a bank or the employer would provide that information to the tax authority. So this reporting regime would require digital platforms to provide information to the tax administration on the amounts received by people providing services through these platforms. It would also apply to sales of goods by third parties through an online platform. Another important aspect of this is that in many cases these platforms might not be located in the country where the individual providing the services or selling the goods is located, in which case the logic behind the system is that with different countries implementing similar rules, they would require the platforms located in their countries to report on the sellers who they have and on their countries of residence, which would then mean that the tax administration would have information on their local residents and then could exchange information with other countries on the sellers who are resident in other countries. Another dimension to this is that the reporting that the platforms are to provide to the tax administration, they will also provide the same information to the sellers themselves to help ensure that those sellers are aware of their tax obligations.
Thank you, Mr. Shum, MP Blakey, and now to, the Conservatives, MP Morantz, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to ask questions around the changes to the Registered Disability Savings Plan. Is one of you able to speak to that? That's you. Just want to mention that this particular program was brought in by Jim Flaherty when he was finance minister, Mr. Chair, and it was really one of his major accomplishments as Stephen Harper's finance minister. And in fact, my wife and I were able to avail ourselves of this plan for our son after it came out, and it's a a very, very good thing for people with disabilities in our country. And so that's, it hits home personally for me. So I just want to make sure that we understand what these changes are for. Do they make, for example, registered disability savings plans more accessible for families? Is the process going to be easier for them? Will more people other than parents, for example, be able to set these plans up? Siblings, for example, close relatives, other people? What do these changes entail?
All right. Well, thank you very much for the questions. I think it will make RDSPs more accessible for an important group of people. And if you look at RDSPs, I mean, for adults who are eligible for the disability tax credit, typically it's the individual themselves that's the holder of the plan. But in some cases, where the individual, because of their disability, where their ability to enter into an RDSP contract is in doubt, then the question is who can be the plan holder. And absent this measure, it would basically require because property comes under provincial law, it would require guardianship. Now, guardianship is something that can be a time-intensive process in terms of having a legal guardian. It can also, reduce the individual's autonomy in important ways, in several ways, and some which they would rather. So what this measure does, it was first introduced in 2012, and it's been extended a couple times, and what the C-47 proposes to do is to extend it one more time, is it allows in those cases what's called a qualifying family member to be the plan holder. So the measure does two things. First, currently the measure, the qualifying qualifying plan holder measure would expire at the end of 2023. So first of all, the bill proposes to extend that 3 years until the end of 2026. And the second thing it does is it currently, under the current provision, it's either parents or a spouse that can be a qualifying family member. And so what this proposes to add siblings, this proposes to add brothers and sisters to the list. So those are the two main changes.
Out of curiosity, why isn't this a permanent provision? Why does it have a sunset?
It has. No, that's a really good question. It's been extended a couple times because, as I mentioned before, this is questions of property are provincial. So, and you've had several provinces, and I think, if you look back to, you mentioned Minister Flaherty's important role, and back to, when the measure, encouraging provinces to have streamlined approaches to have family members represent the individual with a disability. That would be both easier to sign up for than guardianship, and also less intrusive for the person with the disability. And most provinces have done that. It's in fact, in the last couple of years, you've had, just to give a couple of examples, PEI and New Brunswick have recently adopted legislation that have flexible, streamlined approaches to representation. There's a couple of jurisdictions that still need to act. So I think one of the things that was mentioned in the budget was strong encouragement for those remaining provinces to take action, so that basically no matter anywhere there would be a streamlined approach under provincial law so you can think of this as a bit of a backstop. It's, in those provinces that haven't acted, it provides this option. So.
Sure.
Morantz, great questions for a great program. Now we've got MP McDonald for the Liberals still for 5 minutes to finish off our second round.
Thank you, Chair, and thank everyone for being here and the work you've done on the budget. It's no easy task, no small task. I have a few different questions, but I'm going to start with one. Can you clarify for us what the impetus behind the changes to the Income Tax Act as they relate to the veterans and active military armed forces?
Thank you for the question. So this amendment concerns a number of benefits provided by Veterans Affairs Canada and Department of National Defence, generally to ill and injured members or former members. And these are long-standing benefits that have been treated historically administratively as completely non-taxable. They're not reported on slips to taxpayers. But recently, there were some questions asked about whether that treatment was supported under the Income Tax Act or whether, in fact, they should be taxable under current law. So this amendment is essentially just confirming what has been the historical treatment of these benefits, that they would be non-taxable, and it makes an amendment retroactively just to provide clarity effectively.
Okay. Thank you. And I want to go back to MP Darowitz. The automatic tax filing, the Canada Child Benefit is something that we see as an opportunity for many low-income families. And I was wondering if you have any numbers on, based on the automatic tax filing, any numbers on who or how many persons or families will be able to access that Canada Child Benefit going forward?
Thanks for the question. I don't have those numbers with me. I mean, I think that as the budget made clear, and it's a priority for the government, and this is work to be done. So, I mean, it's work that the government will be doing going forward.
So it's also going to be retroactive. That's from what I understood, and I'm wondering how retroactive. How many years are you going back to allow these people to be able to claim the Canada Child Benefit?
I think details like that are to be worked out.
Okay. All right. If you could get those answers, I'd appreciate that. And if it was broken down regionally, it'd be certainly appreciated by all members, I would assume, around this table.
Yeah, I think that's analysis the government would be doing going forward. I don't know. I can say that that's not information that the government has currently.
Okay. So the BIA moves forward in the development of the Canadian Dental Care. I just, I've had several people question whether, and I just want this to be on the record, I'm curious whether this benefit will be taxable or affect other income-tested benefits like the GST tax credit.
No, same answer as for Mr. Baker. It won't be taxable and it won't affect income-tested benefits.
Okay. And you're also, C-47 introduces a crackdown on predatory lending by bringing the criminal rate of interest from the equivalent of 47 annual percent down to 35. How will this measure help Canadians avoid crippling debt cycles? Can you just explain that?
That's in part 4, so I'd ask our colleagues when they're before you on those measures.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to? Okay. Minute, she's going to take it.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you for the floor, Chair. Well, first of all, I want to commend you for the excellent work that you and your teams have been doing and continue to do to produce these budget bills and these budget acts. I know that it's a year-round task. I'm going to start my question and maybe we'll repeat it in the next round. Well, I have to commend your courage because you're tackling something that is very important for all Canadians. We know we have a salary, we're middle class, we pay our taxes, but there are many people who take advantage of the loopholes in the tax system. And you now have proposed in this budget extremely important measures to bring back some integrity to the tax law, especially with respect to the aggressive lending practices. I will, I think, introduce my next question in the next round of questions. Thank you.
At the time, so members and witnesses, we are moving into our third round, and I have MP Chambers up for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. A couple questions about the air traveler security charge. Where do the proceeds or the revenues from that charge go?
Thank you for the question. So all revenues from the air traveler security charge flow into the CRF, the Consolidated Revenue Funds. There is, though, a notional commitment to balance over time revenues from the ATSC and expenses for the air travel security systems. That includes the expenses from CATSA, so the federal agency responsible for screening passengers and their luggage at airport.
Thank you. So on the commitment to balance, is there any documentation that you're aware of that shows what the balance is today?
So there has not been in recent years a public statement about that particular balance. What I can tell you, though, is that the expenses for air travel securities have been higher than revenues generated from the ATSC in recent years. The federal government collected only $419 million of ATSC revenues in 21-22. Now the sector is recovering from the pandemic. We expect to have about $780 million collected for fiscal year 22-23. The budget 2023 committed $1.8 billion in new funding for CATSA. And in that sense, the increase that are included in Part 3 of the bill will help fund those additional expenses. And this is what has been presented in this
Thank you.
budget.
If the government's not recovering the cost of expenses, I'm curious, like other countries seem to have lower charges than Canada does. Why are we looking to increase revenues instead of the expense side of the equation? Why is it that CATSA has the expenses so much higher on a per traveler charge than kind of our comparable jurisdictions, as I understand?
Thank you for the question. That goes beyond my level of expertise. I'm not responsible for challenging CATSA's expenditures. What I can tell you, though, is that the government decided to provide that extra funding for CATSA as part of Budget 2023.
Thank you. Maybe not for you to challenge CATSA's expenditures, but somebody should. Maybe the Transport Committee wants to undertake a study. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
You've got about a minute and a half, MP Chambers.
You know what? I will, if it's okay with the committee, I appreciate Ms. Riddell's answer to my colleague, Mr. St. Marie, if he would like to follow up on that very thorough answer, but there may be some things to unpack there. I'll yield my time to Mr. St. Marie if he'd like to pursue that line of questioning when it gets to him.
Okay, so we're moving to the Liberals now. MP Chattel for, MP Chattel for 5 minutes, please.
Merci. Donc,
Thank you. So I'll continue from where I stopped. In the budget, we see that there are considerable changes that have been put forward to put more integrity in the fiscal system and to make sure that people pay their share in taxes. Yes, there are going to be considerable changes, as I said earlier. I have a question about your consultation. You said that there will be a consultation until 31st of May before this law is enforced or implementing the law. So how much time will be awarded to the committee to see the legislative proposals under BIA2?
So I can respond to that question. So yeah, as was announced in the budget, so going back, so last summer we released a consultation paper on the GAR. In this past budget, we released proposed amendments to the GAR, including draft legislation that included those proposed amendments. So those are out for public consultation until May 31st. In terms of the next steps, I can't commit to specific dates. It would be a decision for the government, but I expect that final draft legislative or further draft legislative proposals taking into account comments that we get during that consultation period would be released, and that could potentially happen in the summer when we release, as we typically release legislation related to budget measures that were not in BIA 1 and the first Budget Implementation Act. And measures that are released in the summer do often get included in the Budget Implementation Act in the fall. So again, it would be a decision for the government, but yes, based on what we've released to date, that would be a potential timeline.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I also noticed that at last there will be penalties for taking advantage of the tax law. So that is a welcome change. Will there be penalties for third parties as well? Because we know that there are many accounting firms and even lawyers who would propose loopholes to those people who don't really understand taxation. So will they suffer from penalties as well?
Proposed don't contemplate a penalty on promoters or advisors, so they would just be a penalty on the person that has engaged in the tax planning.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. Also, could you make the connection between the required declarations and the measures proposed for integrity?
Changes to create new rules that would require taxpayers and their advisors and promoters in certain situations to report certain aggressive tax planning to the CRA. So there are existing rules that exist in the Income Tax Act to address reportable transactions. So those are transactions that are identified through generic hallmarks related to fees that are tied to tax benefit, contractual protection to guarantee a tax benefit, and confidential protection to protect an advisor or promoter from having the details of their plan divulged. So those rules are being amended to make them apply more broadly. As well, there is a second set of transactions related to called notifiable transactions, which are specific types of tax planning. Those types of transactions would need to be reported to the CRA. And then finally, there's also changes related to uncertain tax treatments that are reported on a company's financial statements if they're required. So generally, it's large public companies if they're required to maintain their statements in accordance with accounting principles. Then if they report an uncertain tax treatment, would need to be reported to the CRA. So those rules would allow the CRA to better identify aggressive tax planning, including potentially situations that are subject to GAR. The GAR proposals, which were announced in the budget, which are not in this bill, but which we're consulting on, do contemplate that in order to avoid the penalty under the GAR rules, reporting could be done to the CRA of the fact that this transaction has occurred. So that reporting would occur is proposed to occur under these mandatory reporting rules that I just discussed. So in that way, the measures are linked.
Thank you. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
And now we are going to MP Samari for 2.5 plus minutes. Yeah.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Adam, for ceding your time to me. So I now have 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Concerning the topic raised by Adam, would you like to complete your answer, please?
Do you mean complete the answer to the question that was originally asked by Mr. Chambers?
No, your explanation to Mr. Samery last time, or were you finished?
Oh, I thought I was done.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, though.
Oui. OK. Donc, dans ce cas-là, est-ce que vous...
Well, in that case, would you like to add something, Ms. Riddell, or was your answer already completed?
Specific I would like to raise, but if you have any other questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them.
OK, merci.
Okay, thank you. I will change my topic then. I'm going to talk about the excise tax on alcohol. In the previous implementation act of last year, we had a tax imposed on wine, with Australia that had having a lawsuit with the WTO. We were asking that the importation of fruits and vegetables from maple syrup should be exempted because the ruling did not target those types of alcohol. We were working in the last minute, but thankfully we were able to exempt apple cider and maple syrup, but not other alcohols from small fruits. For example, a cider producer, if they had a percentage of pears included, they would have to pay taxes. And they were actually thinking that it would be excluded. So we thought that with this law, we would see corrections done to that, but that hasn't been done. So my question to you is that, is the ministry working on a solution to that currently? Because we had called on you several times about this. So did you also meet the small fruits producers, small cider producers to talk about this issue? Thank you.
Je vais la prendre.
I will answer this question. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie, for your question. Well, when officers of the ministry are coming to Parliament to answer questions about Bill C-47, we generally will prepare based on the content of C-47, the amendments that were proposed and adopted by the committee in the previous budget. C-19 are outside the scope of our preparation for today. If I may interject, Mr. Coulombe, thank you for your answer. It's very clear. And I would like that you provide an answer to the committee to the question that I had put, if it's possible, in writing. That is, if you are looking for solutions within the ministry and if you had met producers to this effect. Thank you.
That for us, Monsieur Coulombe, that would be appreciated. And now over to the NDP and MP Blakey for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Riddell, I do actually have a follow-up question for you on your previous answer. I think what I heard was that, at least in respect of the second bucket, where you have kind of an anonymous collective that's mining for resources such as they are, virtual resources, pretend resources, whatever you want to call them, that it's a bit of a black box. And so it's hard to figure out. It's not that it wouldn't make sense if you could get the level of detail that you needed about the membership of that collective to charge GST where it's appropriate, but it's that we don't have that information. And I'm just curious to know, and I can appreciate why from a administrative point of view, without that information, it doesn't make sense to have a tax apply that you can't administer. But I'm wondering if there are concerns about money laundering or other kinds of activities that can arise when you don't have that kind of information. Is it a concern of the department that the lack of that information about who's undertaking that kind of activity could also mean that there's other activities that are not legal and not desirable that are being masked by that structure?
Thank you very much for the question. I can only speak to the tax changes. I can't speak to the general risks that this new industry could pose potentially. And I know that issue is being taken up by different parts of our department. So
it is on the radar, so to speak, of the department that the structure may be a problem and that it's worth pursuing?
I can't say for sure what they're looking at because, again, I'm not in that part of the department, but I know definitely I've got some colleagues elsewhere in the department are looking at it from a more holistic, systemic point of view, as opposed to just the narrow tax question, which is what I'm dealing with.
And this certainly seems like an interim solution with respect of the GST anyway, that we have something that we don't know. We don't have the information we would need in order to administer the tax, so choices being made not to administer the tax.
I think that's one way that it could certainly be put. We're faced with a difficulty because there is no recipient, and the GST does rely on there being an identifiable recipient. And the fact that there's not makes it impossible to charge GST. So then it becomes, is it appropriate to have the entire industry, no tax applied to the industry as a whole? There's different ways that can be done. And the choice that the government's made in this particular case is to bring it outside the scope of the GST to ensure that, at the end of the day, some tax sticks. There is some consumption of crypto services in Canada. We can't apply the tax in the normal way, so the services are effectively being input taxed, if you will. But again, I would go back to the fact that there's this large exception there for people where there is an identifiable recipient. So I would argue that in most cases, particularly now the rules are out, people will ensure their affairs are arranged to take advantage of that exception. So we're not being punitive in any way. It's really just, it's a structural concern with the Excise Tax Act and the fact that the rules were not designed in a way that could easily accommodate this new industry.
Thank you, Ms. Riddell, MP Blakey. So now we're going to the Conservatives, MP Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just more of a point of interest for those watching at home because it's such riveting. You're actually supposed to self-assess GST, isn't that correct? As a taxpayer, right? If you owe a GST and it wasn't collected, you're supposed to self-assess and remit. Isn't that correct?
Well, there are self-assessment rules all throughout the Act in all different sorts of situations. I would say that self-assessment is not our preferred approach in general as a rule, just because self-assessment is, the compliance rates are not as high, not surprisingly, as you might expect.
Yeah, we'll give an example. How many Canadians self-assessed GST on Netflix services or digital streaming services prior to a couple years ago? Very few, I think, right?
I think that's fair.
Yeah. I want to thank all of you for the very kind of thorough answers to some technical questions and also some questions that probably didn't apply to the matters at hand, so thank you. I don't know how to ask this, Mr. Chair, but given the dense nature of the bill, if there's agreement from my colleagues, and I don't know if I don't want to do a motion on this, but if there's agreement from officials or the colleagues, I think in the past there's been some understanding that for technical questions only that pertain specifically to the bill, that questions posed in writing could be followed up with at a future date while the study is still going on. Not to inundate people with questions, but we just got this last week. If there's a question technical about a particular section that comes up, 3 days from now while we're still doing the pre-study, but you're no longer going to be coming to appear, if we could get an agreement, if that's okay with folks, is that something that we agree with, that we can pose written questions to officials throughout the study?
MP Chambers, that's a practice I think that you've used numerous times, and yeah, we will continue with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. No, and you've been very helpful. You've been very helpful. You just, you wake up at night sometimes and you just like, there's a question that comes, and so you want to.
We have officials here in person, right?
Yeah,
now.
Well, sometimes they're not always available when I have the question. No. And not to take away from the great discussion, but I would like to maybe expeditiously deal with the motion that was tabled last week on extending the tax filing deadline. I read it into the record last week, but I would like to move that now. And so I would move that motion now while I have the floor.
Okay. Members, discussion on that? Yeah, I did see MP Zurwitz and MP Morantz.
I think Marty was before me.
MP Morantz and MP Zurwitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to speak in favor of this motion. It's a very important motion. There's a lot of uncertainty right now as to what's going on at CRA. I noted in question period, I think it was yesterday or the day before, several questions were asked about filing deadlines at CRA of the Revenue Minister and which she did not respond to. Ultimately, Minister Gould, to her credit, did say something about electronic filing still going on. But of course, we're not clear as to whether Canadians can get through to CRA and whether they'll be getting their refunds on time. Or when they'll be getting their refunds, whether they'll be able to get through to CRA even to get their questions answered in order for them to be able to file their taxes. So I would actually like to see the Revenue Minister come to the committee, and I am hoping to get all members on side with this. I don't know if we need a separate motion for it or not, at least a request to the Revenue Minister to come to committee to sort this out. So we just don't have the information that we need at this point to know whether or not the services at CRA are happening as they should at a critical time of the year, given the strike. So the purpose of this motion is to extend the filing deadline for 21 days beyond the end of the strike in order to make sure that Canadians are able to get the information and the services that they need in order to comply with their obligations under the Income Tax Act. With that having been said, I think this is an important motion that all members of this committee should support.
Thank you, MP Morantz, and we're going to go to MP Zerowitz. Although we did have the Minister of Revenue was before our committee, MP Morantz. Just
Mr. Chair, that was before the strike.
Okay. Thank you, MP Morantz. Okay, thanks. And so MP Zerowitz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank my colleague for putting forward this motion. I think it was put with good intent. I think that, when we sort of see strike go on, you're like, oh my gosh, then there's a strike. Maybe it's going to impact people who are filing taxes. So my sense, Mr. Chambers and colleagues, I don't believe that it is because there's a strike out that we should be moving forward with delaying the tax filing deadline, and for a number of reasons. One is right now there is, and I think everybody knows this, we have the IT systems. It's all set up to actually send out sort of its benefits and its tax credits as of July 1st. So it's automatically set up. If there's any delay right now with the filing of the taxes, then what happens is then it's going to actually impact those IT systems. You actually have to recalibrate it. That takes apparently weeks to be able to do, and that's actually going to impact the benefits and credits of thousands of Canadians. So that's one thing. Two, in my riding, because we help so many people and direct them to so many different places of how to be helped to get their filings done, none of that's being impacted by the strike. So they're all going to your local community centers. They're going to places that offer these free tax filing services. None of that is being impacted by the strike. I'll also say to you, and I think Mr. Morantz asked this earlier, what does it actually say on the CRA website? It says, the tax filing deadline has not changed. Canadians should take steps to ensure the return is filed by May 1st, 2023. The CRA will continue to accept all returns during this labor disruption. Those that are filed digitally will largely be processed automatically by the system without delay. We want to make sure that people, particularly during this time where everybody is feeling the pressures of the high cost of living, that they are not going to be delayed on accessing these benefits and their tax credits. My understanding as well is that CRA is not the only tax authority. There is also going to be, if there's a delay of accepting tax filings, there's going to be implications for Revenue Quebec as well, who we understand don't have a desire to move their filing deadline. And maybe the last thing I would say to you is that there's only been once in history that we've actually delayed it, and that was during the pandemic. And that was for legitimate reasons, because we didn't know what was happening in the pandemic. But I think right now you have CRA continuing to encourage people to file their taxes. We do not want to be, from my perspective, I don't think that there's anything that would hinder Canadians from actually being able to continue to file their taxes. And we want to do everything we can to make sure that benefits and credits that are due to thousands of Canadians are not put at risk because of this. Although I do say to you, Mr. Chambers, I do think that you've put this forward with good intentions. I just don't think that in the end it's going to have the desired impact that you'd like it to have. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Zerowitz. I believe I've got MP Blakey and then MP Chambers. I don't know if I saw any other hands. No? Okay. MP Blakey, then MP Chambers.
Sure, thank you very much. I'm happy to speak in favor of the motion. I think I take Ms. Zerowitz's point about the timeliness of paying out certain benefits, and I think it's important to encourage Canadians to file on time, but to provide some flexibility for folks who have questions that they can't get answers to right now, or in certain cases might need permissions. Like I think I just heard a story about someone who's been, locked out of their CRA filing account. They need to call the CRA in order to get access to their account. They can't do that while no one's picking up the phone. So that's somebody who shouldn't be penalized, in my view, for having a late return because they're not able to do the things they need to do to file their return. So where Canadians can file their return, I don't think there's anything contradictory about the government saying, on the one hand, if you're able to file, do file on time. We encourage you to file on time. There are benefits to filing on time. But in the event that you can't file on time, you're not going to be penalized. And I think it's also important to note that while I take all the resolutions of the committee very seriously, this isn't a binding resolution. It's not something that government is going to have to implement. I would encourage them to implement it. I would encourage them to be thoughtful about it and to think about ways that they may already start preparing to, try and accommodate late filing for payments of certain benefits on July 1st. This is something that the department has some experience with. I wouldn't say that it went well, but during the pandemic there were delayed filing dates, and so hopefully there's been some lessons learned by the department about how to do this and how to mitigate some of the negative impacts. But the fact of the matter is, for Canadians that aren't able to file on time because they need access to someone on the CRA line, their benefit payments on July 1st are going to be delayed already. So certainly, again, encourage those who can file on time to file on time. But for those who can't, I think there should be an understanding that they won't be penalized for circumstances beyond their control. Finally, I would say the best way to mitigate all this is for the government to reach a fair deal at the table as quickly as possible. The PSAC have been over 2 years, or about 2 years, without a contract now. None of the bargaining issues are new. They waited a long, bloody time for the government to put an offer on the table, well past the expiration of their contract. So let's not pretend that somehow we're in this bind for any other reason than that the government was not presenting a reasonable offer in anywhere near a reasonable timeline. The best way to get around all this is to have an expeditious end to negotiations by getting a deal. When we've had a year of completely unprecedented inflation, to put numbers on the table that don't in any way reflect the period of inflation that we have suffered, when we know that public sector negotiations set the bar for wage negotiations across the entire economy. The PSAC isn't just out for themselves. They're out for workers across the country in private industries as well, who are interested to make wage gains that recognize that they've been kicked in the teeth over the last year on the cost of groceries and rent and everything else. And if the public service settles and the government insists on giving them a wage deal that doesn't recognize inflation, they won't just be punishing the PSAC, they'll be punishing workers across the entire economy who are going to go to employers to ask for wage increases that recognize inflation and be told not even federal civil servants got wage increases that recognize inflation, so why should you get it? So this is an important negotiation for the entire country with workers across many different industries who are rightly looking to ensure that their paycheck keeps up with the increased costs. And it's why this government, who says that they care about workers, should be concerned not just for civil service workers, but they should be concerned to have an exemplary deal that shows employers in the public and private sector how to fairly accommodate their workers that have been suffering greatly as a result of inflation. That's the best way to get this done. But in the meantime, if certain Canadians who can't reach anybody at the CRA right now want to take a few extra days to file their taxes, I think that's the least we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Blakey. And so I've got 3 people still up. But I know MP Chambers was next, but he's asked to go last. So I've got MP Samari, MP Zerowitz, and then MP Chambers. And hopefully we'll still have some time to get to our officials who are here waiting eagerly for our questions. So MP Samari, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I still have several questions. for our witnesses here, so I hope we will have time to get to them. Before joining the committee, I was with women and men at Joliet who were on the picket lines because I was saying that we are with them and we need to have a fairly negotiated collective agreement, and so we want to reiterate the request to government to have a good agreement. And we are here, the week is going through and nothing has moved forward, so we believe that the Minister of the Economy should intervene personally. So in addition to everything that we have seen in the past years, we should not simply wait and see because it results in dramatic and drastic situations. I said this in the last session, and I agree with Adam's motion. I think it's a good motion. I fully understand the arguments presented by Julie, and I thank her for those explaining that. And I want to rather side with Daniel's argument. So those who can do their tax returns on time should do it. But as he said, if an accountant or an accounting office has specific questions to ask to the CRA, they may not be able to get those answers, and that is problematic. Now, this entire situation is added to the lack of manpower in the accounting sector, which makes a situation whereby it's very difficult for them within this period to produce the requests. Let me remind you that in Quebec, we spent several days in several regions without electricity because of ice rain, and so many accountants were in that situation. Quebec has already given them an extension so that they can submit tax returns a little bit later because of that situation. So I think that we, G7 country, can give some extra time considering exceptional circumstances. Thank you.
I have MP Zerowitz. I know I have MP Chambers. I have MP Chattel. You want to speak to this also? Okay, MP Zerowitz, MP Chattel, and then MP Chambers, please.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, just because Monsieur Samari as well as Mr. Blake had mentioned this, I want to respond as well because I think it's fair to do so. Of course, we want a fair deal. And of course, we want a good deal. We all want an end to it. I do want to just remind everyone there were 570 items on the table, and we're now down to a handful. So I think a lot of tremendous work has been done by both sides to try to reach a fair and good settlement. So I just want to recognize the extraordinary work that has been done and how far we've actually come onto that. And just because we're having a tough negotiations now doesn't mean that we don't continue to support strong labor rights and we don't support our public service unions. We absolutely do. The only other point I want to sort of add to the current debate at hand is that, again, according to the CRA website, approximately 95% of the 17 million people who have filed their taxes have already done so using self-serve digital options. And there are, and I appreciate, because this is the case in my own riding where not everybody has access to a computer, although if they go to our non-profit organizations, they would be able to be helped. But there is a step-by-step instructions called Learn About Your Taxes, and you can engage with Charlie the chat box who can answer your questions online. So I just encourage anyone who's listening who might want to be calling CRA and who might have some additional questions in terms of wanting to file their taxes, that there might be some online resources available to them. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Zerowitz, MP Chattel, and then MP Chambers.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was a civil servant for several years myself, so I can tell you that we fully understand the situation and we all hope that we will arrive at a satisfactory solution for both the employees and the government and all Canadians at large. So a fair deal for everyone. Concerning this motion, I know it comes from good intentions, but I have to underscore that in Quebec, Chair, most taxes are declared together. Most Canadians, or a large number of Canadians, use software that combine both tax returns. So what would happen with this motion, unfortunately, is that we might confuse some Quebec citizens who might delay in submitting their tax returns, and that would be penalties on the Quebec side for them because Quebec is not required to respect those recommendations. So it could have a negative impact on Quebecois, and I don't want to associate with myself with that, so I would not support this motion.
Chattel and MP Chambers, I think, to wrap this up. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the comments from my colleagues, and I won't take any more time other than just to say no Canadian should be penalized for not being able to get information they require. The business tax inquiry line is down. Only certain calls are getting through. And the online chat function with a human is not available. So Charlie may be great, the chat bot, but he's overloaded. So if the government has a better idea, and y'all have more line of sight into what's possible and not possible, and I won't amend the motion, but I'll leave another consideration for the government to think about. No Canadian should be assessed a penalty for filing late if they owe after. As a compromise, although I'm not willing to compromise on the motion, I will keep it as is, and I think we should go to a vote. But it makes just sense for Canadians who expect some services that they're not going to be penalized. So this was an idea to give Canadians some comfort while they're stressed out trying to find out some answers or get into their MyCRA account to extend the filing deadline. So if the government wants to take a different approach, that's fine, but I'd like the committee to express its will.
Okay, thank you, MP Chambers. Discussion on this, MP Chattel? Yes?
Monsieur le Président, pour
Thank you. I just want to confirm that there are currently taxpayer relief measures
where they can file for X, Y, and Z, and that the CRA already has a process to waive penalty and interest due to circumstances that are out of the control of the taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Chattel. MP Lawrence, yes?
Sorry. Just a brief intervention. I just did a little bit of research with respect to the chat box, Charlie. One is it says it's a pilot project. Secondly, it says please do not include any personal information. It's basically a frequently asked questions device. So that is not a substitute for a human being who should be answering Canadians' questions.
Thank you, MP Lawrence. Any further? No further discussion. So, MP Beach, sorry. Did you have? I'm ready to vote. Oh, you are. Okay. That's good. So, clerk, I think the members are ready. Sasha, thanks.
Mr. Baker?
Opposed to the motion.
Mr. Beach?
Opposed.
Madame Chattel?
Contre.
Ms. Zerowitz?
Contre.
Mr. McDonald?
No.
Mr. Chambers?
In favor.
Mr. Hallen?
In favor.
Mr. Lawrence?
In favor.
Mr. Morans?
In favor.
Monsieur Zé-Marie?
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey?
In favor.
7 yeas, 5 nays.
Yeah, motion carries. Okay.
I think that's probably all my time for my round.
That is. I think so, MP Chambers.
I
I'm
just
just trying
the
to.
time for the motion doesn't count.
What was left? You've got about a minute and a half of your time.
Okay. Charlie, the chatbot, I'm sure is great. Maybe at some point we can replace the work of some members with artificial intelligence based on some of the. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure it could do a better job than me sometimes, but I'll yield the rest of my time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Just on that point of order, Mr. Chair. Oh, just.
You can take my time there.
Oh, on that point of order, Mr. Chair, I want to suggest to the analysts that we call Charlie the chatbot as a witness in the event that the Minister of National Revenue is not available.
Chambers, yes. Okay, so going to the Liberals, is it MP Chatel? Is it? Yes, we. MP Chatel, are you up for it?
I'm totally ready.
Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Waiting for Charlie to replace me. I will ask a question about in the budget we had again two very important international development. We had some discussion amongst committee member already, and I will wanted to have more information to prepare this committee on what's coming, will come very, very soon, is the global minimum tax. And I know there was a lot of progress and some legislation that will lead to that, but on a higher level, would you be able to explain to this committee what exactly are the main features of this global minimum tax and how it will apply? And I know MP Morin, who just left, but I had some question about that.
Yes, thank you for the question. So the global minimum tax, which is being negotiated at the OECD's inclusive framework, a group that involves over 140 nations. The intention is to address remaining risks from base erosion and profit shifting, even after other recent initiatives from the OECD and others, and also to sort of put a floor on tax competition and do away with the tax competition which is available currently when countries can have corporate tax rates down as low as 0%. The general framework that is being negotiated involves looking at a multinational of a certain size, and the threshold that's being used is 750 million euros in revenues. That multinational would need to calculate its the effective tax rate on its operations in each jurisdiction in which it operates, and a top-up tax to 15% would be levied whenever the effective tax rate in that jurisdiction is less than 15%. This calculation would be based on the modified version of the accounting profits of the multinational in each jurisdiction. Now, the next question would be who gets to collect that top-up tax. The hierarchy or the order effectively provides the first right to collect that top-up tax to get to 15% to the jurisdiction where the low-taxed income is happening. If that jurisdiction doesn't tax up to 15%, then the top-up tax could be collected by the jurisdiction where the multinational is headquartered. And if that jurisdiction does not implement the global minimum tax, there's effectively a backup rule to ensure that multinationals, no matter where they're headquartered, are subject to the minimum tax. And this backup rule would say that would take the aggregate amount of low-taxed income across the multinational that has not been taxed up to 15%, and then allocate it out to the countries where the M&E operates and that have implemented the minimum tax. using a formula based on where its employees and its tangible assets are located.
Thank you for this, the mechanic. May I confirm, and we had discussion with the Conservative on that, but this is a global minimum tax that will ensure that MNEs, multinational enterprise, wherever they are located, will globally be subject to a minimum tax of 15%.
That is correct. Minimum tax of 15% in each jurisdiction in which they operate.
And compared to what we discussed.
Chattel, but thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chaume. Now we are off to MP Sainte-Marie for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. I am eager to see the implementation of this important agreement of a minimum tax of 15% worldwide. So thank you for raising this issue, Ms. Chattel, and I'm grateful for the Biden administration for proposing it to international organizations. Now, concerning C-47, with respect to the law regarding the transfer of family benefits, is it in Part 4 or is it in one of the 3 first parts?
Related to C-208.
Oui.
Oui. Alors, ces règles ne sont pas.
These rules are not in the bill. In the budget, we published legislative preliminary proposals for consultations with the public, and that will be a decision for the government, but I don't think it would be in a bill. It's possible that it would be in a bill in the fall. Thank you. So those rules that we've been waiting for 2 years now, every week companies are asking us about it, family companies, farms, etc. They have been asking us this question, and you're saying that it's not in this bill and possibly it will be available in the fall. Well, thank you for your answer, even though it's not satisfactory to me. Now, with respect to doubling the GST credit, which is better known as the grocery rebate, if C-47 is adopted before the end of the parliamentary session, how does this bill accelerate the payment of this GST credit?
Merci pour la question, mais
Thank you for this question. There are 2 things that are necessary here. We need royal assent for the bill, and secondly, the agency needs to be able to make that payment. So it really depends on these 2 conditions. So in answer to your question, it really depends on the date when royal assent will be given, but also the agency's capacity to make the payment. So in that respect, thank you for your answer.
That is the time, but you can submit a question, and I'm sure you'll get an answer to it. Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. And now we are to MP Blakey for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. My question just goes back to the OECD reporting requirements for online platforms. I'm curious. So another debate that's outside of tax policy is around the classification of employees in the gig economy, and I think California is an example of a jurisdiction that has tried to have some law about so-called gig workers or independent contractors who effectively work for the same company a regular amount of hours performing similar work are effectively employees. I'm curious if you could break down some of the reporting categories for us within the OECD framework. I'm curious. I don't expect you to be able to say yes or no, but I'm curious what they are to see whether some of that reporting data might be useful if the government chose to pursue employee classification legislation. if they're reporting out on the number of hours worked or the type of work, or if it's really just a more limited set of data that have to do with tax collection, or if there would be a broader subset of data that might be used for other purposes like employee classification.
Yes. So the reporting regime would not cover employees. So your question is on point for that. And if there were a reclassification of some of these gig economy workers to be employees, then there would be direct reporting by the employers to the tax administration, and they would fall out of this reporting regime. The types of information that would be reported would be identifying information about the individual. It would also provide information on their jurisdiction of tax residence, how much consideration they had received for each quarter of the year, and the number of the relevant activities that they had undertaken, any fees or commissions that would have been withheld or charged by the platform in their dealings with the platform seller. Additional information would be provided with respect to people renting properties, but I don't think that's relevant to your question. So there would be information about aggregate employment or aggregate income received, which could potentially be helpful, I would imagine, in that respect, although not necessarily definitive.
Thank you very much.
MP Blakey, thank you, Mr. Schulm. Now to MP Lawrence for 5 minutes.
Perfect. So when I first got some of the highlights of the budget coming through, and some of the, I might say, copious leaks that came out that seemed to get to the media before it got to us, one of the things that seemed at least beneficial to the government in getting out there was the grocery rebate, which seemed to be, I was thinking maybe it'd be something to maybe reduce the carbon tax or to give individuals a benefit. But I'm really troubled. I can't see the difference between this and the GST rebate increase done the previous year. Can you tell me what's different about this grocery rebate than a GST rebate? Anyone?
If we look at the legislation, it's essentially the same.
So why would you call it a grocery rebate when it's just a GST rebate? Seems odd to me.
That's a decision for the government. I think when we go to grocery stores, we all find that prices are pretty high, but in terms of the mechanics, you're right.
So there's no restriction that you have to, this is just for clarity, there's no restrictions on these rebates, these essentially, they are HST or GST rebates with respect to food or groceries, because I've had numerous constituents call my office as to asking me how this grocery rebate works, but just so you can clarify, there's absolutely no restrictions on how this money is spent, and it really has no connection to food whatsoever.
It'll be a payment that people receive.
Yeah. So no, there is no qualifications or conditions on this money. People can use this for whatever they want.
That's correct.
Okay, so this was just simply some cheap marketing that the Liberal government put out there to help them, I guess, maybe push back some of the trouble that people are feeling right there as food has, in some cases, doubled in cost over the last couple of years. We're at food inflation consistently near or above 10%, continue to be a challenge, and this Liberal government's response is cheap marketing. I think we know where that goes. I do want to spend some time, though, just on the technical side, just to, of course, everyone here values the tremendous work that our veterans have done, willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice so that we can maintain a peaceful, free country. And I did want to spend a little bit of time on the taxation of veterans and active benefits. So just so that, and this is simply just for clarity so that any of our veterans are aware. So maybe I could actually just hand the floor over to someone who's comfortable to talk about and just give an explanation of what what this Budget Implementation Act seeks to do with respect to the taxation of benefits that are going to our veterans there.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So effectively, this is a legislative change that confirms and clarifies the existing long-standing non-taxability of a number of benefits that are being offered by the Department of Veteran Affairs and or the Department of National Defense. So individual members or veterans do not need to do anything. Amounts they've received have been non-taxable in the past. They have not been reporting these amounts. They have not been receiving slips, tax slips, and they will not receive those slips going forward. They don't need to amend any returns. It simply says, yes, the treatment that has been administratively taken historically is confirmed in law retroactively.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Maxson. So just to clear again, veterans don't have to take any action. There was just a potential, I guess, disconnect between the legislation and the policies as they were administered. They've been administered as non-taxable, but I guess there was some ambiguity. But veterans don't have to take any actions, and all of their benefits will continue to be tax-free. Just so we could, I just want to make sure veterans are perfectly clear about that. So.
Right. So this pertains to a number of very specific benefits. There are certain benefits received by veterans and certainly members of national defense that are taxable and have always been taxable. But these particular benefits are, certain payments for persons with disabilities or their families that might be for medical expenses or equipment. And these amounts, they do not need to take any action. There's no change from their perspective. It's just clarifying some questions that have been raised about these existing benefits.
MP Lawrence, and now we'll go into our final questioner for this round and for this meeting. That's MP Baker for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to go back to what Mr. Lawrence was just saying to the committee, and I just thought it was worthwhile for us to reflect on that for just one moment. So he referred to the grocery rebate as cheap marketing, and the premise of his argument was that the mechanism to deliver relief for folks who are struggling with the cost of groceries is similar to the mechanisms used to provide the GST rebate. And I think that that's really disappointing. When COVID hit and we provided CERB to folks who needed that support or supports to businesses, we used mechanisms, some of which were new, some of which were similar to mechanisms that have been used in the past. And I don't remember Mr. Lawrence calling that cheap marketing, or the Conservatives calling that cheap marketing. People out there are struggling in my community and across this country with the cost of groceries. And the government's responding to that by saying, look, we're going to deliver help to you as quickly as possible. Obviously, we need to pass this bill, and so hopefully the Conservatives will pass it quickly. But at the end of the day, to suggest that help provided to folks who are struggling to pay their bills, and struggling to pay their grocery bill specifically, to call that cheap marketing, I think is disappointing and shameful. And I think it's a reflection of where the Conservatives are right now. On the one hand, they talk about how folks are struggling with the cost of living, but when we propose measures to help them with the cost of living, they either vote against it or they try to tear it down and they call it cheap marketing. So I just wanted to point out that contradiction and hypocrisy. With that, to our witnesses, I'd like to come back to the BIA. I mean, I'm wondering if someone could speak a little bit to the way the Department of Finance undertook consultations on some of the measures listed in Part 1 of the bill.
Sure, so I can speak to that. So the consultation process has been different for different measures. In general, so all of the measures in Part 1 of the BIA were previously released in draft form for public consultation. In some cases, there would have been additional consultation that would have occurred earlier in the process as well. When we release legislation, draft legislation for public comment, we typically receive a number of written submissions. We also often hold meetings with stakeholders or people that reach out to us with different interests on the legislation, including technical points or policy concerns. So we hold a number of those meetings and we receive written submissions and we review those all very carefully. And we take those into consideration in determining whether to or how to revise draft legislation. So that occurred with respect to, I would say, the vast majority of the measures here were released last year or earlier. A few of them were released more recently in Budget 2023. But, again, some of those would have had consultation before or would have been the reflection of ongoing feedback that we receive from stakeholders and from interested Canadians.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I have a question. I wanted to go back to the changes to the income tax as they relate to veterans and active members of the Canadian Forces. I'm just wondering if someone could clarify for the folks at home the changes and how the changes in the BIA will impact veterans. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Thank you for the question. So these amendments pertain to a specific list of benefits, and individual members who have been receiving these benefits should not notice anything changing. It confirms the treatment that's been in the past, which is that they've been non-taxable. So individual recipients who've been receiving these amounts have not reported them on their tax returns. That's fine. That's great. That's the treatment that this amendment confirms, and they don't need to do anything in respect of this.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Those are all my questions.
MP Baker, and on that note, let's just take this opportunity to thank our hardworking officials at the Ministry of Finance. Thank you for coming in. Thanks for your testimony, for answering the many questions for us here for this study. We really appreciate it on behalf of the entire Finance Committee. Thank you. Members, I just want to catch your attention really quickly. The budget for this meeting was distributed, just so everybody, if I could have approval. Yep. We're good? Okay, thumbs up. Okay, on that. Thank you. Yeah, we got a lot of headsets here. So we've got a lot of officials coming in, and we thank them for the work that they do and that they're going to be able to come to us virtually or in person, although we do like in person. Thank you very much, everybody, and that will adjourn our meeting.